If you ask me, in general, this is probably the most disappointing generation of gaming consoles, not in terms of the games themselves, but in terms of innovation. Especially when you consider that the Wii U is really the console that is in the same generation with the PS4 and Xbox One, as the Switch is technically next generation, I guess. And it's really because of what will be the theme of this video. Perhaps we're getting deep into the realm of diminishing returns when it comes to games in the visual sense. Like when you look at the generational shifts in the past, the NES to the Super Nintendo to the N64 and the PlayStation 1, for instance, you can look at those games and see a major difference. And even more recent generations brought us the dawning of online gaming and HD graphics. But this generation hasn't really felt like a major leap, and especially compared to the previous ones. Now maybe that era's largely done. Like now we're just going to be fine-tuning things, or we need totally new experiences like VR. I'm not claiming to know the answer here, but what I am claiming is that right now, 4K gaming for consoles was not the way to go. I may be misremembering things, but I feel like once HD TVs were around for like 2 years, pretty much everyone I knew had one. With 4K, it's been around for like double that. And I know 2 people, I think, who own 4K TVs, and that is, again, TVs. I'm not counting all 4K displays like monitors for PCs, as that's not what I'm talking about. We're focusing on consoles here, people. Since PC is primarily a custom market, you're only limited by what you want to buy. Since console gaming has far less options, especially for power, we have to look at it differently in terms of the use of 4K. And I'm not trying to just blast 4K gaming here. I'm saying we're not at a good place in terms of selling it or consuming it yet. It's kind of like VR, in my opinion. Not to that extent at all, but it's like gaming clearly isn't there yet to make it a noteworthy experience. For an example, honestly, the only VR game I've played to this point that didn't feel like a cheap tech demo was Resident Evil 7, as it's a full game that's entirely playable in VR. But for VR to become more of a mainstay, it's gonna be at least a few years. And that's how I feel about consoles when it comes to playing games in 4K. They're just not ready yet. And by that I mean, you can't get the tech cheap enough to where it's consistent. You can even see this by like the charts and stuff being released for the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X games. Devs are all over the place in terms of like, oh, this game will be in 4K 30, or this game will just have greater textures at 1080p. The message isn't consistent because these machines are struggling to manage 4K content. And in most cases, it's not even true 4K. So I mean, just given those 2 facts, that 4K TVs aren't really taking off, and that these current consoles only give you some games in 4K, is it really that surprising that people aren't going nuts over these new boxes? But rather than just knock it, why don't you discuss what you would do? Good question. Thanks for asking. I will. Simple. 1080p is still the standard, and it will be for at least the next couple years, at least the way I see things playing out. But there is one thing that still boggles my mind about standard HD gaming. Why the hell are we still playing at 30 FPS on consoles? Like, all this talk about resolution, but frame rate always gets pushed to the side. Simply my focus, honestly, what I thought would have been this generation's big upgrade from the previous one from the beginning, but certainly for these more powerful consoles, 1080p 60 frames per second should have been the standard across the board. None of this chart crap. We should have figured out what we need in the box to do like The Witcher 3 in 1080p 60 and went from there. This way, everyone benefits and sees a huge improvement. And honestly, this is a little story time for you. I bought a 4K TV last year when Best Buy was doing this like holiday promotion where you could buy the TV in like November and return it hassle-free until like January 10th or something like that. So I went for it to try out a 4K TV. When I hooked up the PS4 Pro, one of the first games I played was Rise of the Tomb Raider, which has various options for how the game can take advantage of the Pro. I honestly felt like playing the game even on a 4K display looked way better in 1080p 60 frames than it did at 4K 30. to me, the smoother animation was way more noticeable than the fine details brought out by 4K. I know that this will differ by user and preferences, and things like distance from and size of the TV will come into play, but it's generally how I feel. And I'm saying I just think that should have been the focus for getting games up to 1080p 60 across the board, over this, having some games in 4K and the mid-generation drop. I mean, there was a lot of things about this current crop of consoles that really boggles my mind. But I mean, I can't be the only one who thinks it's a little depressing that a game like Destiny 2, a first-person shooter, is still only playable at 30 frames per second on console. I'm not usually one to meme out, but seriously, for these beefed up consoles, we're playing a first-person shooter at 30 frames? What year is it? Now, I will admit that 4K is definitely on the upswing, and I'm not trying to hate on the resolution. I'm not trying to argue that it's bad or, God forbid, you can't tell the difference. I'm not one of those guys, I swear. I'm just saying I don't think this was the time to push it. But 4K TVs are coming down in price, big time. Like, I was just looking on Amazon, I searched 4K 55-inch TVs, then I searched 1080p 55-inch TVs, and it's almost like manufacturers are trying to price out the 1080p's with how close they're getting in prices. And when it gets to that point of it being only a couple $100 difference, of course people are going to go for the 4K. Also, more movies are coming in 4K. I saw Disney's finally getting on board with starting with Guardians 2, I think. Netflix does more programming in it. Basically, I do think there's a future for it, keyword being future. But I feel like waiting a couple of years would have been better in terms of going the 4K route. I mean, let's be real, the next generation of consoles has surely been in the works for a while, and I wouldn't be surprised if they drop in the next few years. Perhaps by that time, 4K TVs will be more widely adopted, and perhaps more importantly, the console creators will actually be able to get the proper tech in these systems to run everything at 4K. And we can ditch this chart stuff. Can you tell how much these feature charts and graphs irritate me? But yeah, with that, this video is a wrap. Let me know what you think about the recent push for 4K console gaming in the comments. Do you think it has a future? When do you think the 4K push will really take off, if ever? As always, I'm Zaccari, and thanks for watching.